it's my pleasure to be here. So let me share my screen. All right. So do you see the screen in full mode? Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. So my name is Dr. Sebastien Foucaud. It's my pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for the informative session so far, and for the invitation. I am a bit an outlier because I'm not an agriculturist myself. I'm actually a data scientist and specialist in artificial intelligence. But I'm working in the agricultural sector with a company called SBSF Agritech. So I'm wearing several hats today. I'm actually an executive technologist at a US-based consultancy group called Palo Alto Strategy Group, where we are doing technological-based consultancy, and I specialize in artificial intelligence myself. I'm the co-founder of SBSF Agritech. I'm going to talk a bit more in a minute. But I'm also an adjunct professor in the Pakistan University based in Punjab, India, a university that has been recently founded in collaboration with Berkeley University and Purdue University in the US. And I'm teaching data science and AI illustrated to Indian students at undergrad and graduate level there. So I have very deep connections with India, obviously, here. Just a second. All right, my next slide. So what is SBSF Agritech? So you will have the chance to have the managing director of SBSF Agritech speaking tomorrow, Dr. Shravani Basu. So she will go far more into the details of what the company is doing. Our presentation is tomorrow at 16:15. SBSF Agritech is a subsidiary of another consultancy, India-based consultancy, SBSF Consultancy, that is whose managing director was a speaker earlier today, Dr. Basu. And what SBSF stands for is Science, Business, and Sustainable Future. And our focus is really to try to address the most largest challenges that agriculture is going to face in the near future, where due to first, most of the solutions and technology developed in the past 20, 30 years have been done within view agriculture in the Western countries. So back in my country in France, or in Europe, or in the US, where land has been, holdings of lands have been consolidated. But when we look into East Asia, South Asia, and Africa, the land are still very much fragmented. So it makes it far more complicated to mechanize. But it's also an opportunity, because it's also an opportunity to develop a different way of running agriculture compared to how it's been done in Europe. Because in Europe and in the Western countries, we used excessive amount of inputs and irrigations that led to soil degradation, and essentially bringing more and more difficulties to grow new type of crops, or decreasing with time passing the yields produced by the existing crops. Furthermore, as you're probably aware, all of you, today we have a shifting climate pattern. We can see that everywhere in the globe on daily basis, and it's worsening year by year, where we have excessive droughts that are completely changing the landscape and how to conduct agriculture today. And finally, with the globalizations and the change of the climate, we see a transboundary emerging pest and disease outbreaks covering the entire globe. One of the most recent examples is the fall armyworms outbreaks that are spreading globally, that affected very badly Africa in the recent years and India today. And Dr. Basu is going to talk about it a bit more tomorrow. And why I'm here and talking about agriculture, why I'm an AI guy, artificial intelligence guy, is because there is a tremendous opportunity today to tackle those problems using data and data science in particular. With the democratization and the development of cheaper chips, or to measure IoT, to Internet of Things, and the development of broadband technologies that are getting cheaper and more accessible to everyone, plus the fact that lots of satellites are now monitoring the globe constantly, and most of this data is made available. For instance, ESA in Europe is making most of its data available. So we have a tremendous opportunity to really access to very wide and large of global, but also local and proprietary data that belongs to the farmers. Furthermore, cloud computing is developing further, and it's getting cheaper and cheaper to run computations. So those two elements combined are really a good opportunity to democratize basically data science and develop products that will be used and help and support agriculture in a sustainable way. So basically have a different approach to agriculture using these technologies. So at SBSF, what we've been focusing on, one of the products we've been focusing on is basically a product that is land scouting for ideal crop for growing regions. So the idea is to combine information and data from climate, weather, soil, plus information about the land, geography, etc., that is available today. So here we have two examples of a paper of climate prediction from ERA 5 that shows in a region in East Asia the temperature and precipitations models, and this is forecasting for the next 10, 20 years. And on the right-hand side, you can see a picture from the Sentinel-2 multispectral instrument, which is a European satellite that is basically supervising or taking data points of each point on the world every other day. So every 2 days, we have a picture taken for a given land in different bands, in different visual bands. So by combining this information together, we can really develop models using computations to understand where crop grows. So for that, we need the additions of information about the crops. So we know where crop grows, we know the conditions in which they are developing currently or they've been developing in the past, and we can combine that to create a mapping that is identifying suitable ecosystems for crops to grow. So we can mine these data sets, map the whole world, and just look for ecological zones that are similar globally. And once we have done that, we can introduce or provide list of crops that could be easily introduced in a sustainable way in different locations. We can also scout for lands for growing crops that are in the verge of extensions, for instance, very important for some, for instance, industry like in pharmaceutical industry or perfume industries, luxe industries, where they are really looking for sources of very peculiar crops that only grow in certain areas. So thanks to our model, we can provide them other areas where potentially these crops can be developed. And finally, we can also use these predictions to look into yield predictions of the crops and then work directly with the farmers to discuss or to consult and advise them on which crop could grow in their areas. So the way it works is that once we have combined all those data and several, let's say, millions of GPUs that are crunching all this information together, we can create this type of maps here that you can see on the picture. Each color corresponds to an agroecological zone. And then we can map the entire world with that based on supervised machine learning and identify sites that are presenting very similar characteristics. And as I mentioned before, what we can do once we have that, we can identify similarities and do the mapping and understanding why they are similar, which conditions they are sharing. That helps us to identify, in one hand, potential crops for a given site. So we can basically make recommendations of crops that naturally could grow in that site. Also, it's never been introduced before. On the other way around, we can identify sites for given crops where those crops have difficulties to grow where they were naturally growing before, because then with that type of model, we can also be more resilient to climate change. As I mentioned before, we can introduce the climate change models into our mapping and then see where those crops will grow in the next 10 years. So I just, before this meeting, I just run the model for Guinea for 3 different sites, Kindia, Nura, and Bela. And as you can see the map here of AAZ, so agroecological zones that are similar to those different sites. So essentially, if we focus on Kindia, for instance, you'll see that East India, for instance, around Orissa, etc., present very, very similar characteristics. The same, for instance, when we start looking into South America and Brazil in particular. In the case of Nura, you see that the entire equatorial belt is presented in also South India and Northern Australia. So once we have been doing this mapping and we have identified those areas that share very similar characteristics, we can do the cross-matching with crops. So for instance, in the case of Kindia, in the case of Kindia, we have a list of around 4,000 different crops, more than 30,000 varieties that are output by our model. which are very likely to be grown in this area. So amongst the crops that we could identify here, it's just an excerpt of the output of the model. But we have groundnut, ginger, onion, garlics, mustard, rapeseed, cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, cotton, olive, etc. Some of them being naturally growing there, some of them not yet, and that could be introduced, because what this model is telling us is that those plants have very high likelihood to be able to grow in these regions. What we did in the past is that we've been commissioned by the government of Sikkim with a given plot of land in the hilly region of West Sikkim. So you can see the pictures where traditionally potatoes were grown, and they wanted us to make them recommendations of which crops could be developed in this area. So we run the model, and this is here in green. I'm not sure how clear it is, but you can see basically Sikkim is in the northeast of India, or at the foothill of the Himalayas. And you can see in green appearing all those regions, Himalaya-based region, but also all the Andes in South America. So the outcome of this model was we could grow around 80 different cultivar crops in this particular plot. Some that are already indigenous, so crops that are naturally growing there, like allium, brassica, camellia, etc. But also some that never grew there, asparagus, cacao, which is an interesting recommendations. And out of the recommendations that we made, we selected a particular crop called Anika Montana. So Anika Montana, it's endemic to Europe and Norway. It's a medicinal plant that is used in European pharmacopoeia, but also in beauty elements. It's a huge market in Europe and Western Europe, and it's used in the massage oil, homeopathy. So you see some of the product here by Veleda that are using Anika Montana. This is a small yellow crop. Anika Montana in Europe, actually, wild variation of Anika Montana is forbidden for collection. It's protected, so it makes it very limited for the industry to develop further. And Sikkim, the highly region of Sikkim, is actually a good candidate for growing it. And we're talking a multi-million US dollar market to unlock. So we're in the conversation now with Sikkim to start a production and first introduction of Anika in this particular region, and then exploit the full, basically, production chain to be able to provide these seeds and these plants into new markets. So what we need to do, and what we are focusing on as a company, is really to have a concerted data strategy around agriculture. We need to be able to use this publicly available information provided by different governments. As I mentioned, in India, we have, for instance, the soil information that is provided, very high level details that is very, very useful. But we need to combine that also with local information. It's critical for some of the projects that we have, a bit lesser than land scouting, but for instance, tomorrow when you hear about the fall armyworms, it's very important for us to have local information at the farm level. And for that, we need to work with the farmers more directly, with the extension workers, to be able to introduce this technology that is getting very, very cheap, as I said, to measure moisture or local weather variations, to include to our model to make them far more specific, and then make the right predictions to support the farmers. The advantage of the approach that I presented today also is that we can guarantee that it's a sustainable approach, because essentially we're just looking at crops that naturally will grow in the same conditions, which means that we can limit the amount of output or requirements for irrigation, because these plants has basically grown in areas that are very similar. There's a lot of work that needs to be on the data side. It's still a very much limitation to focus of SBSF. We also are a fervent believer that we need to broaden the focus away from the major crops, rice, maize, soybeans, and wheat, and introduce new crops that will develop and be more sustainable locally, provide the right amount of food and energy locally as well. And also, there are a lot of work that exists with data science and AI today, but they focus very much more on the finance and the risk, a bit lesser on how to support the farmers directly. So this is really the direction that SBSF is taking. We need to have a shift around sustainability. We need to be better at supporting farmers against the climate change. Crops that were growing in the past 10 years in the region may not grow in the next 10 years anymore due to the shift in climate patterns, and we absolutely need to cater for it. And overall, as I mentioned, we need to have a different approach to agriculture than the one that's been traditionally developed in the Western countries today, and more focused on smallholders. And finally, crop diversification, I mentioned that. It's very important, in particular, introduction of crop rotation and intercropping, because we are now know that multi-cropping or having several crops in the same field is the right way to ensure protection around disease. I think we heard early on about groundnuts and aflatoxin, and the fact that garlic could be a good support there, but also for the soil. So being able to re-enrich the soil locally by having different crops rotating. And also thinking about... So this is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to get some of your questions later on. So SBSF Agritech is currently raising investment. We want to develop our product further. We are collaborating with governments, with companies today, and we are a small team, and we are going to increase. You will hear about us again tomorrow. And if you need to contact us, you can go on our website or directly send me an email at Sebastien@sbsfagritech.com. And that's it for me today.